I never thought I'd hear those words from my own son. You deserve nothing but dog food. He slapped me, right there in front of everyone, after I'd just paid £50,000 for the wedding he claimed he couldn't afford. I'd paid for the venue, the flowers, the dinner, even the honeymoon suite. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? I didn't ask for thanks, only for a little respect. But standing there, humiliated under the crystal chandeliers I'd paid for, I felt something inside me switch off. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply walked away. The next morning, I made one phone call, and they were left with nothing. The morning arrived with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the promise of a day that would change everything. As I stirred sugar into my favorite mug, the chipped ceramic one Landon had given me when he was 12, I couldn't suppress the smile spreading across my face. My son was getting married. My only child, my reason for living for 31 years, had finally found love. Tina's voice cut through my thoughts like a cold needle, asking if I was sure about this. She was sitting opposite me in my small kitchen, wearing that familiar look of concern I knew so well. Her dark, capable hands were wrapped around her own coffee mug, her eyes studying me with the intensity of someone who's seen too much suffering in hospital corridors. I asked her what she meant, though I knew exactly what she was referring to. The manila envelope rested on the table between us, containing the checks I'd written the night before. Every single penny of my retirement savings. She told me it was my financial security, everything I had. Her voice carried that firm tone she used when scolding junior doctors for not following protocol. And for what? To impress a family that didn't even respect me. I glanced away, towards the window where the magnolias in my small garden were beginning to bloom. It was March in Savannah, and the city was awakening with that southern beauty that had always comforted me in difficult times. As for Landon, I murmured, "Is his wedding, Tina, his special moment? His special moment that he could afford if he really wanted to," she retorted, not softening the blow. Or better yet, that his precious Brielle and her family of old money could pay for without blinking. The name Brielle sent a pang through my stomach. Brielle Hastings, my son's fiancée. Beautiful, elegant, educated at the finest private schools, heiress to a property empire. Everything I had never been or been able to give Landon. And perhaps that was precisely why this was my chance to finally be accepted, to prove I could measure up to the expectations of his new family. "She's different," I admitted, recalling our few encounters. The way her cool blue eyes would scan me from head to toe, assessing my modest clothes, my southern accent I could never fully polish away, my hands marked by years of nursing. "But Landon loves her, and if she makes him happy," Tina's question caught me off guard, asking if it made me happy. I blinked, unsure how to answer. Did my happiness matter? For 31 years, my happiness had been Landon's happiness. When he smiled, I smiled. When he cried, my heart broke. His success was my success. His dreams were my dreams. "My happiness is seeing him happy," I finally replied, and I could see Tina purse her lips in frustration. She told me I was the most generous and stubborn woman she knew. She stood up and began pacing my small kitchen, a habit of hers when she was worried. She asked if I remembered when I first came to the hospital 20 years ago, with bruises on my arms and a split lip, and the only thing I cared about was Landon not seeing me like that. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. Marcus, my ex-husband, in one of his final fits of rage before I finally gathered the courage to leave. "That was a long time ago," I whispered. "Yes," she said, "and since then I dedicated every breath, every pound, every dream to that boy. I'd worked double shifts to pay for his university, sold my grandmother's ring to buy him his first car, and refused dates with good men because I didn't want to confuse Landon." Her voice cracked slightly, and now I was about to give away my future for a wedding they hadn't even asked me to pay for. But I offered, I protested, though my voice sounded weak even to me. The truth was more complicated than that, and we both knew it. The week before, when Landon had visited one of his rare visits since he'd started dating Brielle, he'd casually mentioned the astronomical costs of the wedding Brielle had planned. The historic venue, the 5-star catering, the honeymoon suite in Charleston. He'd run his hands through his hair, a nervous habit, saying it was incredible how much it all cost. that the Hastings were covering most of it, but still, and I, like a fool, had immediately jumped in. I can help, darling, I have some savings. Some savings, as if £50,000 was loose change I had lying around. The look of relief on his face had been like a ray of sunshine after a storm. Seriously, Mum? That would be, wow. That would change everything. Brielle would be so grateful. Brielle. It always came back to Brielle. Tina interrupted my thoughts, asking if I'd ever really met this girl, spoken to her beyond polite greetings. I thought of our last encounter at the country club where the Hastings were members. Brielle had suggested we meet there to get to know each other better. I'd arrived in my best dress, one I'd bought on sale at Debenhams, feeling like a fish out of water amidst all that marble and crystal. "Oh, Cassandra," Brielle had said, with that smile that never reached her eyes, "what a charming dress. Very authentic." The pause before authentic had been a silent slap. Throughout the lunch she'd made similar comments. About my accent, how quaint it was. About my job, how rewarding it must have been. About my life, how brave I was to raise him alone, though she imagined it must have been challenging for Landon not to have a proper father figure. Every comment was poison wrapped in silk, and I had just sat there, smiling, nodding, thanking her for her compliments because I didn't know what else to do. "I've met her," I told Tina, but my voice sounded hollow. "She's polite." Tina just looked at me with an expression that meant she could see right through my lies. Before she could press further, the phone rang. The caller ID showed Landon's name, and my heart immediately did a little flip. It always did when he called, as if I were a teenager with a crush. His voice was cheerful, happier than I had heard it in months, asking if I had the checks ready. He said they needed to deliver them today, that the wedding coordinator wanted to secure all payments before the rehearsal. "Yes, darling, they're ready." My eyes met Tina's, who was slowly shaking her head. He asked where we should meet. Actually, he said, Brielle thought it would be better if I came to the hotel where they were staying. The Hamilton, in the historic district. He explained that Brielle and her mother were making the final adjustments for the rehearsal and thought I could get to know some of the bridesmaids better. Something in his tone put me on alert, a discomfort as if he were reciting lines someone else had written for him. "Of course, my love," I said. "What time?" 2 o'clock. And, Mum, thank you. Seriously, this means everything to us. To us. Not to him, but to them. The transition was so subtle I almost missed it. After I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the manila envelope. Tina had returned to her seat, watching me with concern. She said I was still in time to change my mind. I shook my head. "You can't let him down, Tina. He's my son. My only son. And you're his only mother," she said. "That should mean something." "It means everything," I whispered. "That's why I have to do this." Tina sighed deeply and reached for my hand across the table, her warm, familiar fingers lacing with mine. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Someone has to be there to remind you who you really are, Cassandra Brooks. Because I have a feeling you're going to need it." At 2 o'clock precisely, I parked my old Honda Civic opposite the Hamilton, feeling small and inadequate next to the gleaming Jaguars and Range Rovers that occupied the prime spaces. Tina and I ascended the marble steps into a lobby that was a world of hushed elegance, a world that painfully reminded me of my place in the social hierarchy. Landon appeared almost immediately, dressed in a tailored suit that definitely cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He looked older, more sophisticated, and for a moment, I had to remind myself that this was the same boy I'd comforted through nightmares, fed spoonfuls of Calpol when he was sick, and cheered for at every school sports day. He hugged me, but it was brief, almost formal, telling me I looked nice. I'd chosen my outfit so carefully. A navy blue 2-piece suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion, low-heeled black shoes, and the pearl necklace that had been my mother's. Modest but respectable, or so I had thought until I saw the other women in the lobby. Brielle was upstairs with her mother and the bridesmaids. He continued, guiding us towards the lifts. "They're excited to get to know you better." Excited. The word sounded false on his tongue. The lift whisked us up to the 5th floor, where we headed towards a suite that was larger than my living room and kitchen combined. The door was ajar, and I could hear the sound of feminine laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Landon asked if I was ready, and for a fleeting moment, his smile seemed genuine, like the boy he used to be. I nodded, clutching the manila envelope to my chest like a shield. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Brielle introduced me to her mother, Victoria Hastings, a woman in her 60s with the posture of a queen and eyes as cold as ice. The bridesmaids, all Brielle's age, all from prominent families, smiled at me with that empty politeness reserved for the hired help. "Oh, you must be Landon's mother," one of them said, her name already forgotten. How sweet. Sweet, as if I were a harmless old dear rather than the woman who had single-handedly raised the man her friend was about to marry. The most painful moment arrived when Brielle, a glass of champagne in hand and surrounded by her friends, began discussing the flower arrangements. "Well, we had to make a few adjustments," she said, her voice laced with a barely disguised disdain. The original arrangements someone had chosen were a tad ostentatious for the venue. Her gaze flickered towards me, malice glinting in her eyes. The peonies I had suggested were more appropriate for the season, I heard myself say, though my voice sounded as if it were coming from a great distance. During my one real conversation with Brielle about the wedding, I had timidly mentioned that peonies were in season and would be more affordable than the imported roses she had already chosen. The silence that followed was deafening. Brielle stared at me as if I had just committed an unforgivable sin. "How resourceful of you," she said finally, and her friends exchanged meaningful glances. Landon, who had been chatting with the wedding coordinator in the corner, approached at that moment, asking if everything was all right. "Of course, darling," Brielle chirped, her smile returning but laced with venom. "Your mother was just sharing her insights on the floral arrangements." I saw something shift in Landon's expression, a hardness I hadn't seen before, a distance that cut me deeper than any direct insult. "Mom," he said, and his voice carried a warning. "Brielle has planned every detail of this wedding perfectly. Perhaps we should leave these things to the experts." Experts. As if my 30 years of organizing charity events for the hospital meant nothing. As if my love for him and my desire to help were an unwelcome intrusion. "Of course," I murmured, feeling the color rise in my cheeks. "I just wanted to help." "And you are," Brielle said with that smile I had come to dread, "with your generous financial contribution. That's exactly the kind of help we need." The message was clear. Your money is welcome, your opinion is not. With hands that trembled slightly, I pulled the manila envelope from my handbag. "Here are the checks," I said, handing them to Landon. "For the venue, the catering, and the honeymoon suite, as we discussed." Landon took the envelope with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, Mum. This really means a lot." But as he said it, he was already turning away, showing the envelope to Brielle as if it were a trophy he'd won. I was left standing there, surrounded by laughter and conversations in which I was no longer welcome, feeling as if I had just purchased my own exile. Tina came to my side, her presence an anchor in a sea of elegant hostility. "Ready to go?" she murmured in my ear. I nodded, but before we could move, I heard the voice of one of the bridesmaids, speaking in what she obviously thought was a discreet whisper. "Poor thing. It's quite pathetic, don't you think? Trying so desperately to buy her way into our world." The laughter that followed was like knives in my back. That night, sitting in my small living room with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, I couldn't shake the look on Landon's face when he had dismissed me. It wasn't embarrassment, exactly. It was something worse. It was as if he'd truly seen me for the first time, and he hadn't liked what he'd found. Tina had stayed for supper and was now washing the dishes while I was lost in my thoughts. "Do you know what the saddest part of all this is?" she said without turning from the kitchen sink. "What?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. "That you think you've done the right thing." Her words stayed with me long after she left, echoing in the silence of my empty house. I went to bed that night with a strange, heavy feeling in my chest, as if something inside me had begun to crack. Tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner. Tomorrow, the celebration I had paid for, but in which I was not truly welcome, would officially begin. As I drifted off to sleep, I didn't know that by the next night, everything would change. That the cracks I had begun to feel in my heart would shatter into a chasm I could never cross. I didn't know I was about to discover exactly what the love I had been buying was truly worth. I woke the next morning with the echo of mocking laughter still ringing in my ears. I'd slept badly, tossing and turning as my mind replayed the events at the Hamilton. But it was the day of the rehearsal dinner, and I refused to let my discomfort spoil what was meant to be a celebration. I dressed with particular care, choosing a burgundy cocktail dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. It was elegant but conservative, expensive by my standards but probably modest by those of the Hastings. I did my hair meticulously, applied a little more makeup than usual, and put on the pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. In the mirror I saw a 64-year-old woman who had lived, who had worked hard, who had loved deeply. But I also saw the fine lines around my eyes, the hands that showed decades of work, the body that had aged gracefully, but without the benefits of expensive treatments and exclusive gyms. "You are beautiful," I told my reflection, trying to believe my own words. The rehearsal dinner was to be held at Magnolia Grove, a restored antebellum mansion turned event venue. As I drove through the winding streets of Savannah, past the historic squares and colonial houses, I tried to calm my nerves. This was my chance to prove I could fit in, that I could be the worthy mother-in-law Brielle and her family deserved. I arrived early, as was my habit, and sat in the car park for a few minutes, observing the magnificent facade of the mansion. White columns soared towards the sky, and perfectly manicured gardens framed the structure. It was the kind of place I had dreamed of for Landon's wedding when he was a boy, though back then I had thought it would remain just a dream. Now, thanks to my sacrifice, it was a reality. Inside, the mansion was even more impressive. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and the walls were adorned with portraits of Southern families from bygone eras. Everything breathed history, elegance, and the kind of money that was inherited from generation to generation. The guests began to arrive. The Hastings with their circle of high society friends, Landon's work colleagues, some distant cousins I had met at sporadic family gatherings. I knew few people and found myself hovering on the periphery of conversations, smiling politely whenever someone spoke to me. Brielle arrived like a queen, dressed in a champagne-colored silk dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my mortgage. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and every piece of jewelry she wore silently screamed her status. Landon accompanied her, dressed in a tuxedo that made him look like an elegant stranger. When I approached to greet them, Brielle met me with that smile I had learned to dread. "Cassandra, you look lovely tonight," she said, her eyes sweeping over my dress with an appraisal that made me feel as if I were being examined and found wanting. "Thank you, dear. You look absolutely radiant," I replied. And it was true. It was impossible to deny that Brielle was beautiful, even if her beauty had a cold quality that unnerved me. "Mom." Landon leaned in to give me a kiss on the cheek, but it was mechanical, as if it were a social obligation rather than a gesture of affection. "I'm glad you're here." There was something in his tone that bothered me, as if my presence were a surprise rather than a given. I was the groom's mother, after all. More than that, I was the person who had made this whole celebration possible. The dinner was an endurance test. I was seated at a side table, far from the main table where the Hastings, Brielle's family, and the most important guests were. My table companions were other distant relatives and a few people who, like me, seemed to be there out of obligation rather than choice. During the meal, I watched Landon and Brielle at the head table. He seemed different, more polished, more distant. Every time Brielle spoke to him, he would nod with a smile I didn't recognize, as if he were playing a part. When his eyes met mine across the room, he waved, but it was an empty gesture. The moment I had been waiting for arrived when the wedding coordinator announced it was time for the toasts. Several family members and friends stood up to speak, each sharing charming anecdotes about the couple. When it was my turn, I rose, my hands trembling slightly. "Good evening," I began, my voice sounding louder than I felt. "For those who don't know me, I'm Cassandra Brooks, Landon's mother." There was some polite applause, but I could feel the tension in the air. Brielle had a forced smile, and Landon looked uncomfortable. I I raised Landon on my own, I continued, my voice gaining strength. They were difficult years, but every sacrifice was worth it to see the extraordinary man he has become. Landon, since you were little, you dreamed of finding someone who would love you just as you are. And Brielle, I can see you have found that in my son. So far, so good. But then, driven by emotion and perhaps the wine, I continued. 31 years ago, when Landon was born, I made a promise. I promised that I would always be there for him, that he would never want for anything as long as it was in my power to give it. That promise led me to work double shifts, to deny my own desires, to put his happiness before mine in every decision I made. I could see Brielle exchange a look with her mother, a look that did not bode well. Today, seeing these two young people so in love, knowing that I was able to contribute to making their perfect day a reality, I feel that promise has been fulfilled. Landon, my love, you are my greatest achievement. And Brielle, welcome to our little family. I raised my glass, expecting the traditional toast, but the silence that followed was awkward. Some guests clapped weakly, but I could see the look of horror on Brielle's face and the mortification on Landon's. I sat down, my heart pounding, realizing I had made some terrible mistake, but not understanding exactly what. I didn't have to wait long to find out. After the toast, as guests moved to the terrace for coffee and dessert, Brielle approached me with a smile that fooled no one. "Cassandra, what an emotional speech," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Very authentic." That word again. Authentic, as if being genuine were something shameful. "Thank you, dear. I just wanted to express how proud I am of Landon." "Yes. Well, it's adorable how parents sometimes can't help but make everything about themselves," Brielle replied, and now her smile had completely vanished, especially when they feel insecure about their place in social situations. The insult was like a slap. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do." Brielle moved closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume and see the calculated gleam in her eyes. "I think you understand perfectly that this is not your world, Cassandra. That it never will be. And that your little attempts to insert your personal history into our celebration are frankly embarrassing." That I was speechless, feeling as though the ground had opened up beneath my feet. "Brielle, you wanted attention," she interrupted, her voice now loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You wanted to make sure everyone knew how much you've sacrificed, how much you've spent, how much you've done for your son." Well, message received. But let me be clear. This is my wedding, and I will not allow your insecurities to ruin it. The words hit me like physical blows. Around us, conversation had stopped, and I could feel all eyes fixed on us. "Brielle, I think there's been a misunderstanding," I tried to say, but she cut me off again. "The only misunderstanding here is that you thought paying for this wedding would give you some kind of authority over how it unfolds." Her voice was venomous now, all pretense of civility abandoned. "Let me explain something to you, Cassandra. Your money is welcome. Your presence is tolerated. But your opinions, your need for attention, your pathetic quest for validation, that is not welcome." It was then that Landon approached, drawn by the commotion. Instead of the concern I expected to see on his face, I saw something much worse: irritation. "What's going on here?" he asked, but his tone suggested he already knew the answer and didn't like it. "Your mother was just sharing her perspectives on our celebration," Brielle said, recovering her poisonous smile. "I was explaining to her that perhaps it would be best if she allowed others to handle the social aspects of the evening." Landon looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something that broke my heart. Shame. "Shame of me, Mom," he said, his voice laden with a warning I recognized from his teenage years. "Maybe you should just calm down a bit." "Calm down?" The words escaped me before I could stop them. "Landon, I haven't done anything but try to be a part of your celebration. A celebration that, I might remind you, I made possible. It was the biggest mistake I could have made. Mentioning the money, making my contribution explicit, was crossing a line I didn't know existed." Landon's face hardened in a way I had never seen before. "Seriously? You're going to do this here? Now? Do what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I'm just trying to understand why. Why do you have to ruin everything?" Landon shouted, his voice echoing across the terrace. Why can't you just be here without creating drama, without drawing attention to yourself, without making everything about you and your sacrifices? His words cut me deeper than anything Brielle had said. This was my son. The silence that followed was absolute. Every conversation had stopped. Every person on the terrace was staring at us in shock and horror. Brielle had a small, satisfied smirk, as if this was exactly what she had hoped for. I touched my cheek, where the sting of his hand still throbbed. I looked at my son, this stranger with Landon's face, and saw a man I didn't recognize. A man who could strike his mother in front of 100 strangers and seem pleased to have done it. Landon, I whispered, but he had already turned away. Taking Brielle's arm and leading her back towards the mansion, I stood there, alone on a terrace full of people who were looking at me with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. No one came to comfort me. No one asked if I was all right. It was as if I were a spectacle, a piece of entertainment that had gone wrong. Slowly, with all the dignity I could muster, I walked towards the exit. I passed groups of guests who parted as I approached, whispering amongst themselves. I passed the wedding coordinator, who looked at me with something approaching pity. I passed the table where my gifts, my checks, my financial future had been. I reached my car without remembering how I had descended the stairs or crossed the car park. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands trembling so much I could barely get the key in the ignition. It was then that I saw Mary Fields, the wedding coordinator's assistant, approaching my window. She was a young woman, about 27, with kind eyes and a worried expression. "Mrs. Brooks," she said softly, and I could see she had tears in her eyes. "Are you all right? Is there anything I can do?" Her kindness broke me completely. I began to sob, great, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. I managed to say between tears. "I can't go back in there. I can't pretend this is okay." "You don't have to," Mary said firmly. "No one should have to endure what just happened." I started the car and drove away from Magnolia Grove, leaving behind not just the mansion but the life I had known. As I drove through the streets of Savannah, past familiar places that now seemed alien, I knew something fundamental had changed in me. The mother who had walked into that mansion a few hours earlier no longer existed. In her place was something new, something I didn't fully recognize but which felt stronger, clearer. It was almost midnight when I got home. I didn't call Tina. I didn't turn on the lights. I did nothing but sit on my sofa in the dark. The silence of my house, which had once comforted me, now felt different. Not empty but full of possibilities. Tomorrow would be the wedding. Tomorrow, Landon and Brielle would expect me to show up, smiling and silent, ready to play my part as the grateful, subordinate mother. But as I sat in the darkness, touching my still sore cheek, I knew I wouldn't be there. For the first time in 31 years, I wouldn't be where my son needed me. And for the first time in 31 years, that felt like the right decision. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my sofa until the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, my cheek still pulsing with the memory of Landon's hand. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, contorted with rage, heard his words cutting me like knives. "You deserve nothing but dog food." Those words had ignited something in me that had been dormant for too long. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity. A cold, crystalline clarity that showed me exactly who I was to my son. Not a beloved mother, but a source of embarrassment and a convenient wallet. At 6 a.m., I made my coffee in the kitchen and considered my options. I could do what I had always done. Swallow my pain, apologize for existing, and show up at the wedding with a forced smile. Or I could do something I had never before contemplated. Disappear. The idea should have terrified me. For 31 years, my identity had been completely wrapped up in being Landon's mother. But as I sat in my small kitchen, feeling strangely calm, I realized I no longer knew who that woman was. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Landon. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 5 minutes later and again. By the 8th call, I finally switched it off. I went to my bedroom and pulled out the suitcase that had been stored in the wardrobe since my last trip, a cruise with Tina 3 years ago. I began to pack slowly, methodically. Clothes for a week, my medications, a few basic toiletries. As I folded each item, it felt as if I were packing away the remnants of my old life. Then, I went to my desk and pulled out my checkbook. Over the next hour, I made a series of phone calls and wrote a series of letters that would change everything. The first call was to Magnolia Grove. "Good morning, this is Cassandra Brooks," I said when the event manager answered. "I need to cancel the wedding reception scheduled for today." "Mrs. Brooks, but the wedding is in 6 hours." "Yes, I know. And I am canceling it. The contract is in my name. The payments were made with my checks. I have the legal right to cancel. But madam, this is irregular. Have you spoken to your son about this? That won't be necessary. All financial arrangements were made through me. Send the cancellation notice immediately." I hung up before he could protest further. The second call was to the caterer. "Magnolia Catering, good morning. This is Cassandra Brooks. I need to cancel the catering service for the Brooks Hastings wedding today." "Cancel? But madam, we have all the food prepared. The contract is in my name. I have copies of all the documents. I am canceling the service, effective immediately." The third call was to the Charleston Harbor Hotel, where I had booked and paid for the honeymoon suite. "Canceling the reservation for Brooks Hastings. Presidential suite 2 nights." "Madam, that is a non-refundable reservation. I am not asking for a refund. I am just canceling the reservation point one by one." I dismantled every aspect of the wedding I had financed. The florist, the photographer, the transport, the string quartet, all received cancellation calls. With each call, I felt as if I were freeing a part of myself that had been bound to the expectations of others. When I was finished, it was 9 a.m. I poured myself another cup of coffee and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Tina. *, my dearest Tina, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Don't try to find me. I am safe and need time to think. Last night, I discovered that the person I thought I was never really existed. She was just a version of myself I built around Landon's needs. I love you like the sister I never had. We will see each other soon. Cassandra. *, the second letter was harder. *Landon, I will not be at your wedding today. Not because I am angry with you, though I should be, but because I have finally realized that my presence was never truly wanted. Last night, when you hit me and told me I deserved nothing but dog food, I saw something in your eyes that it has taken me 31 years to recognize. Contempt. Not just frustration or temporary embarrassment, but genuine contempt for the woman who raised you. For over 3 decades, I made your happiness my life's purpose. I worked double shifts so you could go to university. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to buy you your first car. I turned down dates so as not to confuse you. Every decision I made was filtered through one question. What is best for Landon? Last night I learned that none of that mattered to you. I am not a mother who deserves respect, but a source of shame to be tolerated as long as she is useful. The contracts for the venue, the catering, the flowers, the transport, and the honeymoon were all in my name. I have just canceled every single one of them. This was not revenge. It was a lesson. A lesson in what happens when you treat love as something you can take without giving anything in return. I hope you find happiness, my son, but it will no longer be at my expense. Mom. *, I sealed both letters and left them on the kitchen table. Then I picked up my suitcase and walked out of the house that had been my home for 15 years. I didn't look back. Meanwhile, at the Hamilton, chaos was beginning to unfold. Landon woke with a terrible emotional hangover and the vivid memory of what he had done the night before. For the first time in months, Brielle wasn't immediately at his side, dictating the day's schedule. And in that quiet space, guilt hit him like a wave. He had slapped his mother. In public. In front of hundreds of people. He picked up his phone and dialed his mother's number for the 9th time that morning. Straight to voicemail again. Mom, it's me. Look, about last night, we need to talk. I know things got out of hand, but today's my wedding day and, well, I need you to be there. Call me at 10 a.m. Brielle burst into his room with a look of panic he had never seen on her before. Landon, we have a problem. A massive problem. What kind of problem? The kind of problem where there is no wedding. Her voice was shrill, hysterical. I just got a call from Magnolia Grove. Your mother canceled everything. Everything. Landon sat up slowly in bed. What do you mean, she canceled everything? The venue, the catering, the flowers. It's all canceled. The manager says that since she paid for everything and the contracts are in her name, she has the legal right to cancel. Brielle was pacing the room like a caged animal. How could you have been so stupid last night? The reality began to set in Landon's mind like wet cement. There must be a mistake. She wouldn't do this. Oh, but she did. Brielle threw her phone at him. Call the venue yourself. Call the caterer. Call whoever you want. Your precious mummy just ruined our wedding. With trembling hands, Landon dialed the number for Magnolia Grove. Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry to inform you that your mother canceled all arrangements early this morning, the manager confirmed. The contracts were in Cassandra Brooks's name, and she had the full legal right to cancel. But, can't you make an exception? This is my wedding. We're talking about hundreds of guests. I'm sorry, sir, but without the original payment arrangements and with such a late cancellation, we cannot proceed. Besides, our catering staff have already been notified. One call after another confirmed the same devastating story. Everything his mother had paid for, which was practically everything, had been cancelled. By 11 a.m., Brielle's phone rang. It was her father, Raymond Hastings, and from the volume of his voice, Landon could hear every word. Brielle, what the hell is going on? I've just had calls from 3 different suppliers saying the wedding is off. Dad, Landon's mother has gone mad. She cancelled everything. Cancelled what? With what authority? Apparently, with the authority of having paid for it all. Brielle's voice broke. The contracts are in her name. There was a long, sinister silence on the other end of the line. Are you telling me we allowed that woman to control the financial aspects of your wedding? You said it was fine. You said if she wanted to pay, we should let her, because I thought it was a partial contribution, not that she was bankrolling the entire thing. Landon snatched the phone. Mr. Hastings, there has to be something we can do. Some legal recourse. Legal recourse. Raymond's laugh was bitter. Son, your mother just gave you a masterclass in contractual power. If she paid and the contracts are in her name, she can do whatever the hell she likes. By midday, the news had reached all the guests. Phones were ringing constantly with confused questions and offers of help that came far too late. The Hamilton had become an impromptu crisis center, with Brielle crying hysterically and Landon staring blankly at his phone, waiting for a call from his mother that never came. It was Mary Fields who gave them their only clue as to Cassandra's whereabouts. She had arrived at the hotel after hearing about the cancellations, her expression grim but determined. Mr. Brooks, she said, I thought you should know I saw your mother last night after the incident. You saw her? Where? In the car park. She was very upset. Mary paused, as if debating something internally. I should also tell you that, well, that I recorded what happened last night. Brielle stiffened. You recorded what? The altercation. When you slapped your mother, Mr. Brooks. My phone was recording because I was documenting the terrace decorations. Mary's eyes shifted between Landon and Brielle. I thought you should know. The color drained from Landon's face. What are you going to do with that recording? Mary looked him straight in the eye. That depends entirely on you, and on how you treat the people who love you from now on. It was a silent but clear threat, and as Landon looked at this young woman he barely knew, he realized the consequences of his actions were only just beginning to unfold. Because somewhere in Savannah, his mother had disappeared with all the dignity she had left, and he was left with nothing but the devastation he had created and a bride who, for the first time, was looking at him as if he were completely and utterly useless. The wedding he had sold his soul for would never happen, and for the first time in his life, Landon wondered if it had been worth the price.